Whether you're a self-taught musician, have a teacher, or you're already a professional, this show is meant to help you with knowledge, mindset, craft, and strategies to improve your overall musicianship so that you can become the best musician you can be, regardless of your goals. Welcome to Musicianship Mastery. Hello and welcome to Musicianship Mastery. This is episode number 111. My name is David Lane and it is great to be with you once again. Back on episode 47, when this podcast was known as the Musician Toolkit, I shared an episode on tactics for how to memorize music. And I will put that in the show notes because today I want to talk about why you should memorize music. So after you listen to this episode and hopefully are persuaded why you should be memorizing more often than maybe you are, you might struggle with memorizing music and want to review how to memorize it. So I think that's a good episode, and I went over a lot of ways to kind of understand how to memorize music. So today I want to talk about why you should memorize music. Now, I want to tell you up front that this is a topic in which I have significant personal investment. I am speaking from experience. I have memorized music as a habit my entire life, literally before I have any memory of taking a lesson on the instrument. It's something that I did naturally. In fact, it's probably something I did to avoid having to sight read. And I'm sure my teacher kind of caught on that. But I was also encouraged by my teacher to memorize for performances. And so I always knew that anything that I played, it was helpful for me to memorize it. And it was something that if I was going to play it in public, I had to memorize it. And this is something this isn't actually one of the reasons that I'm going to talk about. But I think it is something that I should share. I try to avoid too many opinions that might be construed as controversial. And this may rub some of you the wrong way. If you're a parent, if you're another teacher, you might strongly disagree with me on this. But I feel like every now and then, if I do have a strong opinion on something and, it's not going to hurt anybody, I need to share it here. And that is this. And this is something that I have fallen victim to as a teacher, and it's something that I'm making efforts to correct. When I started teaching, I required all of my students to memorize their music. And then I started hearing from other teachers that, and even some of them would tell me that this was like their own memory as a student, that they found it traumatizing. And that it was just so stressful having to memorize without having the book in front of them. And so they allow their students, or they prefer to just allow their students to use the book in front of them so that they can get used to playing in front of people, which by itself, it is a stressful experience. To not have that and to have to play it from memory. And I started to go along with that. I have, in recent recitals, allowed my students to use their music. But as I have thought about this and I've reflected on it, I realized that I'm doing a disservice for many reasons. And one of them is this. I think, and here's the controversial opinion part, so I'm sorry if you disagree, if this is offensive. I think we do a great disservice to our younger students by coddling their sense of comfort. I think it's important that you actually intentionally experience discomfort, because I believe that's where growth happens. Now, there's a fine line between discomfort and trauma. So there are some things that we can do. So one of the things, and this is why I probably might even do another version, an updated version of how to memorize music in the future. But I do think episode 47 is pretty good for now. And again, check that out in the show notes. where I talk about how to memorize music. Because I think if you were to memorize everything and not just the music you're going to perform for a recital, if you would to make this a deeper habit that you do, then you don't experience the stress coming from there. Yes, you still have the stress of playing in front of people, but even that goes away with a little bit of practice. And I am hoping to have an episode at least at some point this year, if not within the next few months, about overcoming performance anxiety. Working on that at the moment. I'd really like to have a guest on that, and having some scheduling difficulties in that area, but that is something that I would like to talk about. But your anxiety doesn't need to come from memorization if you improve the skill and improve your frequency of memorizing music. So this is a thing that I want to encourage all of my students, more frequent than performance. Occasionally, we want to take some pieces and just let's memorize it. Now, that's what I do as a teacher. But what I would probably do for myself as someone who teaches myself is to say what I've always done, and this is something that I've always done. I memorize everything I play as I learn it. I don't learn it all and then memorize it. I memorize it as I learn it. Now, I want to talk about why, and this is again from my own experience, but it's also what I've observed in my students who also do this habit as well. So this is 9 reasons why you should memorize everything as a musician, everything that you can. The first one, it's pretty obvious. Even if you forget your sheet music, you can still play. It's kind of annoying when you visit someone, maybe you visit friends or family, and let's say that you're a pianist and they have a piano and they ask you to play. Wouldn't you hate having to say, well, I don't have any of my books with me, so I can't actually play? That's an embarrassing thing to have to say. You should always have music that you've memorized, that you can sit down and play without having to have a book with you. And because you shouldn't have to carry books with you everywhere you go, or sheet music. Even if, you just like pull out your phone and have digital sheet music, it's very awkward to look at your phone. And I don't know if you're carrying a tablet with you, but even still, have pieces that you can play on a moment's notice at any time. So if you don't have your sheet music, you can still play it. The second reason why memorizing is good is that, and you're going to hear me use the phrase off the book. This is probably more of a theater term, but when I'll talk about memorizing is getting off the book. So the second reason is that getting off the book allows you to think more about the music analytically. It allows you to listen more deeply and to pick up on things that are happening on the music. Because sometimes when you're just reading the music from the page, you don't get a chance to really delve into what's going on in the music. That's not to say that score study is not super valuable. There's a whole episode on that too. But when you take away the crutch of the sheet music, you really start to listen, I think, a little bit more intensely and to pick up on the things that are going on with the music. And that leads very naturally into the third reason, and that is that getting off the book allows you to think more deeply and to engage more deeply with the 3 senses. I feel like no more than 2 or 3 episodes at a time go by that I don't talk about the importance of this. Thinking about what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it feels like when you play it. And when you're only looking at sheet music while you play, well, that means you're never watching what your hands are doing. So right away, you're cheating yourself out of what it looks like. And I also think you can't really listen as closely when your eyes are glued to sheet music. When your eyes are free to roam, when you're free to look up, when you're free to close your eyes, this allows you to think more about what it looks like and especially what it feels like. But also you can really listen now. You can really listen to what it sounds like because you have more percentage of your concentration devoted to your senses now. So getting off the book allows you to do a deeper dive into the three senses that you use when you are learning to play music. Now let's talk about the fourth reason why, and that is that getting off the book will allow you to more thoroughly examine your technique. This is because you're able to watch what you're doing. You're able to watch what your hands are doing. And so if it's fingering patterns or if it's what your wrist is doing, whatever it is that will help your technique to improve, you can't really improve it if you're not watching the part of your body that's doing the technique actually do it. Anybody who dances, they'll tell you don't watch your feet. But when you're learning, you should watch your feet. You need to see what your feet are doing, see where they're going. And then as soon as you can, stop looking at them. But at the same time, when you're working on your technique, you need to watch what is going on. And so get your eyes off the music, off the sheet music, and you can get your eyes on what your body is doing to help improve your technique. I hope that you will find that this fifth reason is really obvious, and that is getting off the book will help you to more deeply explore expressive details. Because if you don't need to look at the sheet music, you can probably close your eyes. And you can probably really listen to the warmth, the tone, the quality of the music, the things that you want to bring out. And you can hear the music the way you might hear it as a listener. And think about what about the music is it that actually moves you emotionally. And you can try to bring out those qualities. You can start playing around with slowing the tempo in this measure and then speeding it up in this measure. And maybe adding a crescendo here and a diminuendo here. It doesn't matter that the sheet music doesn't say to do that because you're not looking at it. You're no longer constrained by the black and white that was on the page. Now it's all about the music that you're making. And you have the freedom to really listen now, to explore those things that enhance the music that you're playing. And I don't think you can really do that well while there's sheet music in front of you. So this might be, for me, one of my biggest reasons, besides the fact that the first one, I want to not be unable to play for someone because I don't have the book. But this might be, I guess, my second biggest reason, to allow me to really deeply explore the expressive details, to bring out those magical qualities of the music that I think are very hard to do when you're looking at the sheet music. The sixth reason why you should memorize music is that playing from memory looks more impressive and more professional. Might be a vain reason. I've actually heard someone make this criticism, not about classical music, but about rock bands. There are a lot of cover bands, and I think for good reason, especially if you've got a high volume of music, you don't have a lot of rehearsal time, that they have the lyrics or they have maybe even a lead sheet of all the songs that they play. And so you'll see them at the gigs with iPads or with music stands. And when you see a band who doesn't do that, who has memorized everything, they don't have any cheat sheets, their eyes are free to be closed while they play, or they're free to engage with the audience. That is a more impressive performance than going somewhere where they have to keep their eyes on the music. First of all, it looks like you've spent time with the music. For all I know, if I'm going to watch you play with sheet music, you might be just a really excellent sight reader, which in itself could be impressive. But I like to know that when I watch a performance, I want to believe that the person performing has spent time with the music. And I think that if you've memorized it, then you have spent time with the music. So it just looks more professional. It looks more impressive. The seventh reason why it might be a good idea to memorize your music is that even if you are in a situation where it's acceptable and even expected to be using sheet music, such as when you're playing with an ensemble, memorizing can give you a safety net And it's especially helpful for things like page turns. If you don't have a designated page turner, or even if you do, there's going to be a little bit of time where you are playing, you don't have time to see what you're playing. So memorizing those last couple of measures of one page and the first couple of measures of the next, that is always a good idea. That way you know that if there's a problem with you or someone else turning the page, you can keep on going because you've memorized it. It's not a problem. But also, sometimes when you're playing as a collaborative pianist, and by the way, just as a little preview, next week's episode, I'm going to be talking with a guest about this very topic, about being a collaborative, specifically a collaborative pianist, but I think it'll apply to all musicians, so definitely check that out. Things can happen, such as a musician that you're playing with, maybe they're playing from memory, maybe they're singing from memory or whatever, and they miss a line, they miss something. So that now the argument is, this is why you should have the sheet music in front of you if you're doing the accompanying, because that way you can visually find where they are. But I would also say, yes, okay, but if you have the music memorized, you can more quickly figure out where they are. So being able to memorize the music will assist you even in situations where you get to or you are expected to use the sheet music. The 8th reason, this first came up from when I talked to Jeff Wesley early on in the podcast. I think it was in the early 40s in terms of episode numbers. He said this very thing, and then I heard it again when I interviewed Dr. Larry Wang about maybe 20, 30 episodes ago. He said the exact same thing. Memorization is a natural reflection on how well you know the music. See, if you're doing this correctly, memorizing is not something you do after you've learned the music. It's something that happens because you're learning the music. Because if you really learned the music if you can't take your eyes off the sheet music? Some of you might argue, yes, if you're not persuaded yet why you should memorize music, you may say, I really know it. But I would challenge you that there's more to know. That how can you really know the music if you have to look at something to be able to play it? So if you're really getting to know the music, if you're really engaging your senses and you're thinking about the expressive details, and you're taking time to really explore what's going on, then you won't need the sheet music in front of you, because memorization is something that naturally occurs. And this is something I can attest to. I can't tell you the last time I tried to memorize music. It just happens. I start watching my hands, and it just happens. And it happens because I've made a habit of it. I'm sure if I decided to stop right now memorizing music, and then maybe 2 or 3 years from now pick it back up again, I might find it difficult. But the fact is that I've always memorized music. I've always taken the time to do that. So now this was the end of my original list. I was going to give you 8 reasons why you should memorize music, why it's a good idea. But then I thought about this today. I am looking at a milestone birthday coming up. I'm going to be getting to the age of 50. So there are certain things that I start to think about with the process of aging. So I would say if you're under 40, certainly if you're under 30, this is something that you won't think about as a reason. Coming from somebody who's getting older, it absolutely is something that will matter eventually that you have to think about. And that is that memorizing music regularly helps offset the aging process and dementia. Now, I don't know enough about certain types of dementia-related diseases to know if you can absolutely avoid them. I do think that this is an area that we will see breakthroughs over the next few decades if there's adequate funding. There's always scenarios by which this could be a very wrong prediction, but I think if research is allowed, I think that dementia will be something that we can make really as obsolete as we did polio at one point, and that is to just completely eradicate it. But for right now, it's a very real thing that millions of Americans, and especially as we tend to live longer on average, it's something that's actually becoming more common. So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But there's been a lot of research that says there are certain things that you can do in terms of exercising your brain to help offset. One of those things is simply working on getting better at an instrument. So I've talked about how one of our core skills is sight reading. You should be sight reading, and that's completely the opposite of memorizing. But you should be sight reading. That is good for your brain. So these little discomforts, these little challenges is good for your brain. But also memorizing as much music as you can. This is also great exercise for your brain. So give yourself that opportunity to exercise and possibly, maybe, hopefully, just postpone the aging process, maybe eradicate it completely. We can be hopeful even if we don't know if that'll work for sure. So I hope that there was something here that you found helpful. If maybe you heard all of this and you still disagree with me, I welcome that too. Feel free to share with your own voice by going to speakpipe.com/Musician Toolkit, or go to my website at davidlanemusic.com, fill out the contact form. You can send me a message of your choice. And also, if you want to be on an email list that will start being used for this podcast semi-regularly, I will not inundate your email with spam. So no more than once a week. And it'll be once a week just to talk about this podcast and some thoughts. That'll be happening in the near future. If you want to go ahead and get on that email list, just go to davidlanemusic.com, and just in the box that says for a message, just all you have to do in the subject is just put subscribe. And I will have your information and I will put you on the list. So that's going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I will be back with you again next week.